Hi guys. So normally before we take a chapter quiz, I like to, go over things and make sure that you got out, out of the chapter what you're supposed to get, and hopefully, better prepare you for the quiz you are about to take. Since I'm obviously not there, I thought I would make this video so that we can do just that. So on all of the notes that I assign and chapters I assign, there's always going to be a PowerPoint that goes with it. And so really, I'm just going to go through some of the slides in this PowerPoint. I want to make sure that you guys get the most important pieces that you were supposed to get in chapter 6. So let's start. So first of all, you'll notice a big change between Chapter 3 and Chapter 6. Chapter 3 was all about biogeochemical cycles, so carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, all that stuff, whereas Chapter 6 is all about ecosystems and how their population grows, depending on the type of species that are involved. Some of this is basic. This is basic biology here. So you have, you're in the difference between an individual, a population, community, ecosystem, and a biosphere. We're going to go through. You don't need to know how to calculate like growth rates. I mean, you use the basic sort of calculation with growth rates, which we'll do later when we get to actual human population. But this whole equation, like n sub t equals e to the rt and not, we're not going to work with this formula, at least not right now. So really all you had to get out of it is the different type of growth patterns that we see with different types of species, and know those different types of species and their characteristics. So things like R selected species versus K selected species and how they grow, and the different parts of the logistical growth model. So there are different things that affect the way something grows. First of all, you have what is called the biotic potential. So the biotic potential is where would this population grow to if there were nothing limiting it. Now, this is a hypothetical situation because we do have limitations like space and resources, and there's competition for food and mates and stuff like that. But if there were none of this, if there was an unlimited amount of space, unlimited amount of resources, unlimited amount of males and females, I mean, if you think about it, just nothing holding these species back, that's the biotic potential. What number or how many elephants would you have, in a population if there's nothing holding it back? There was unlimited space and resources and everything, no hunting, all that stuff. So that's the biotic potential. I'll show you what that looks like on a graph here in a second. Things that do limit population growth, they're divided into two pieces. One is density dependent factors and one is density independent factors. In general, density independent factors are things that happen randomly. Most of them include weather-related stuff. So if you see something density independent, it's usually weather-related. So like a drought or a hurricane, fire, we see there, pest spraying. But on the test and on the AP test, you can generally easily pick out density independent factors by just looking for which ones are related to weather. Density dependent factors are things that directly influence the number of species. These are things like competition with males or females. Space would physically limit the number of species. The amount of food and water would limit it, and how many predators they have or disease. So these are non-weather related things that would directly affect the amount of species that can exist. Whereas a drought and a hurricane and a fire, those are like random events. Those are things that aren't always there. They just happen randomly. So that's how you can tell. So density independent, mostly weather related, random events, whereas density dependent are things that are sort of constantly always there, restricting the way species grow, like competition or space or food resources and predators and stuff like that. So you've learned in biology there's a thing called carrying capacity. So all species kind of at some point, that carrying capacity is a number in which all organisms kind of have to abide by. Now, depending on the type of organism, it will affect the shape a little bit, which we'll see here. But that carrying capacity is kind of an important number. That's how much that ecosystem can support. So this is what we call the logistical growth model. So what we see here is that all species, when first starting out, start out exponentially growing. And so I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here, but you'll see in the bottom, they can exponentially grow. And then at some point, we get to the carrying capacity, and it starts to level off. Now, as we'll see here in a minute, R-selected versus K-selected species, you may see overshoot, and it kind of oscillates back and forth, or some of them just kind of approach the carrying capacity, depending on the species. But what you want to point out here is, so the biotic potential, what I was talking about earlier, the biotic potential would like shoot up if there were no resistance factors going on, the population would just keep growing exponentially. The population would shoot way up here, and it would just live up here in infinite land. But that's not reality. In reality, we do have factors. These are resistance factors. They have environmental resistance up here. Sometimes they put it over here too, but that push it to not grow exponentially. So these are things like food resources and space and stuff like that. But this is the logistical growth model. It's like an S-shaped curve here that starts out exponential and then kind of levels off with your carrying capacity. That's the big one you need to know, is the logistical growth model. And so these are the way that species generally grow. So logistical is the way that it actually grows, whereas like intrinsic would be like the way it would grow on its own. Theoretically, but logistical is like how it actually grows. And this is what you'll see most of the time. So here's an example of a species that that does not grow according to, it has an overshoot of its carrying capacity. So this is an example of reindeer that had no predators. All the predators had died off or were not around, and so these reindeer were able to grow way past their carrying capacity, and then they killed all the resources. They ate all the grass, whatever their food is, and so there was no food left for any of the reindeer anymore, and we had a die-off or crash in population. And that's what we see sometimes with those kind of species. So here, these are the other two big ones you need to know. Absolutely, you will absolutely see multiple questions on the test on R strategist versus K strategist, and also on the AP test. You need to know what an R strategist is and what a K strategist is, and you need to know some examples of types of species. It's really easy to remember them. I always think about the uppercase and lowercase. So an R strategists are generally smaller organisms that grow and reproduce extremely quickly. So think of these like bugs. They're going to grow very, very rapidly. Mice, or any rodents for that matter, bunny rabbits would be R strategists. They grow in high numbers very, very quickly. So when it comes to carrying capacity, oftentimes they will overshoot it, and then you'll see a die-off, and then they'll grow, overshoot it, die off, grow, overshoot it, die off. And you see this oscillation on the carrying capacity. They grow very, very quickly. That's different from a K strategist, capital K, big. These K strategist stands for bigger animals. These are animals that have long gestation periods. And let's go to the thing. There are fewer of them. They reproduce at a later age. They oftentimes have very specialized diets. These are things almost, I would say, I want to say 100%, but I don't want to say 100%. I would say 99.9% of all endangered species are case selected because they don't reproduce very quickly. So anything that is endangered is endangered because they don't produce very easily. So these are more of your endangered species, which these are not. Notice the differences. Like elephants, for example, they have very long gestation periods and they may have one offspring. It takes years for them to get to reproductive age. Whereas a mouse gets to reproductive age like in a few months. So they're very opposite each other. You need to have some animals in mind. Think of anything. Humans would be case-selected species. Bears, elephants, giraffes, anything that's large in general is going to be a case-selected species. But you need to know some of these. I mean, if you can remember all of them, awesome. But you need to remember a lot of these things because these are all multiple choice questions on the test and on the AP test. And are selected species. So I think of lowercase r for small things, uppercase K for big things. That kind of helps me remember those. Survivorship curves, generally things that are very large have a survivorship where most of them will live very long and live to be an old organism and then die off. Humans would be in this category where most people live long lives and then as they get old, they start to die off. Small animals or plants, or these are weeds, you would see a lot of them die off very quickly. So think of bugs or weeds. A lot of things work against the survival of bugs and weeds and stuff like that. A lot of things are trying to kill them off. Very few of them make it to be at a long or a late age. And then there's some organisms that are kind of in the middle that have this kind of constant loss. They kind of can die at any time. A lot of these end up being your mid-size animals. Squirrels are pictured here because squirrels would normally kind of live a long life, but they do have a lot of predators, and a lot of them get run over by cars. And so they can die at equal rate at any point in their life. Just because they are bigger, they don't have a lot of things trying to kill them, but there are things trying to kill them, and they can get run over. Skunks or raccoons would be in this category too. Range of tolerance. This is another concept here that organisms generally live within a range of tolerance, things that they can, the optimum ecosystem environment to which they can reproduce the most, and that's called a range of tolerance. Now, pictured here is temperature, but this could be anything. This could be pH. The window could be a certain pH range, and you get too far out on the fringes, and you start to see animals die off, and then no animals exist. Temperature is the same thing. You can have pollution levels, nitrogen levels in the water. I mean, anything that's going to cause the impact species, you can have a range of tolerance for, but that's what that is. I think that's pretty much you watch in niche partitioning in that. If you haven't done the e-learning, you need to do that. Niche partitioning basically talks about why species can coexist and they don't compete, and species strive to not compete for resources, so they do different things. So that's what niche partitioning or resource partitioning is. So make sure you know what that is. Hopefully you did the e-learning. I think that's pretty much it here. There's different types of Relationships, we'll talk about this later. You don't see too many questions on relationships like mutualism or commensalism. Um, I think that's pretty much it. Succession is in here too. You will see some succession questions, but we'll get to that more later on. I think that's trophic cascades, and that's pretty much it. So sorry that ended up being a lot longer than I thought. Hopefully that really helps in what you're supposed to get. I feel really bad that I'm not here for your review day, so hopefully you got a lot out of this little mini review, and that when it comes to the test on Tuesday, you will be prepared. There are a lot of study things. There's a practice test online. Don't get overwhelmed when you open up that practice test. There's like 80 some questions on there. The test is not near that long. There's just a lot of repeat questions, different ways to ask them. I encourage you to go through as many as you can. There's an answer key that you can check your answers on. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me or send me a message over Canvas. And then we'll take our test on Tuesday. All right. Thanks.